Who doesn't love a good slasher movie? When done right, few things within the horror genre can be quite as enjoyable, as entertaining, as erratic, and as outright carnage-laced than a great slasher picture. There are so many notable elements that play a part in making a great slasher, and one such element is the ability to have horror hounds hitting pause in order to truly take in exactly what they're seeing on their screens. That take-in might be in regards to a shocking reveal, to visually explore a shot in a quest for new detail, or even to compose yourself after seeing something truly brutal play out. I'm Tilly from What Culture Horror, and these are the 8 most paused slasher movie moments. 8. Stepping out of the shadows, The Strangers. Brian Bettino's The Strangers is a phenomenal horror that torments and terrorizes its audience just as much as it does the couple who find themselves in the crosshairs of Man in the Mask, Pin-Up Girl, and Dollface. Part-time slasher picture, part-time home invasion movie, the sheer randomness of the heinous events of The Strangers is a striking and stark warning of just how erratic and chilling the world can be at times. Like a cat playing with a trapped mouse, this 2008 offering is a harrowing viewing experience that makes you uncomfortable in your own skin. Part of the twisted charm of The Strangers, of course, is in how delicate its delivery of terror is, and there is no finer example of that than when we realise the Man in the Mask is ominously lurking inside the cabin where Liv Tyler's Kristen is. The use of lighting here is fantastic, with the Man in the Mask barely visible as Kristen is utterly unaware that her would-be attacker is there. Even more impactful, the use of one continuous wide shot as Kristen potters around the kitchen here only adds tenfold to the tension and unease of the viewer. It's also here that many reached for the pause button, with us all keen to try and get a good look at the creepy figure menacingly watching from the shadows. 7. The Evidence Locker, Bride of Chucky. By the time of 1998's Bride of Chucky, the Child's Play franchise well and truly had its tongue firmly in its plastic cheek as it veered more towards the realms of comedy than out-and-out horror. Perfectly encapsulating this spirit is a moment that had Child's Play fans reaching for the pause button, with Bride of Chucky's opening act playfully acknowledging certain other horror properties. As Charles Lee Ray's former beau Tiffany, played by Jennifer Tilly, looks to breathe new life into Chucky, she manages to wrangle her way into the police evidence locker that houses the nefarious good guy doll. In a grin-inducing move, we find that Chucky isn't alone in this lockup. Without mentioning by name and not using exact replicas, Bride of Chucky then showcases the masks of Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees of the Halloween and Friday the 13th franchises respectively, the knifed glove of A Nightmare on Elm Street's Freddy Krueger, Leatherface's chainsaw from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and even some of the puppets from the Puppet Master series. It was brief, but it was brilliant, as Bride of Chucky had people pausing the film to see which other famous horror properties they could spot during all of this. 6. Wes Craven's cameo, Scream. Wes Craven's Scream is one of the most influential, game-changing movies in the history of horror, full stop. Taking the overplayed, formulaic tropes of the slasher subgenre and poking fun at them, the meta approach of Scream both made fun at itself while likewise being absolutely terrifying. Forget A Nightmare on Elm Street, forget The Hills Have Eyes. It was Scream where Wes Craven was at his absolute finest. Not only was Scream utter genius, it also gave us a brilliant Blink and You'll Miss It cameo from Craven himself. As Henry Winkler's principal Himbry gets spooked by a knocking sound outside his office, we see Himbry briefly investigate the nearby empty school corridor. And it's here that we get one of the most enjoyable horror cameos imaginable. Not only do we get a disheveled Wes Craven as the school janitor, we also see that he's wearing the same style sweater and hat of one of his other most famous creations, Freddy Krueger. For good measure, the character is likewise named Fred. To say that Craven and his brilliance are missed is an understatement of enormous proportions. Simply put, Wes Craven was absolutely one of a kind. 5. The skull-laced final shot, Psycho. While some cite Black Christmas and Halloween as being the true launching point of the slasher subgenre, others will call on Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho as the movie that really introduced audiences to what would become the slasher film. The issue is dependent on just how many kills you feel are warranted to view a movie as a slasher movie. Psycho only offers up 2 deaths, of course, those being Marion Crane and Detective Milton Arbogast, yet the tone and approach of the picture is forever viewed as the precursor to what would follow with the likes of the aforementioned Black Christmas and Halloween. Due to its clear influence over slashers that followed, and for just how impactful its paused moment is, that means Psycho is a worthy inclusion here. even if that's just as an honourable mention. In terms of the paused moment in question, that's during the final moments of Hitchcock's 1960 masterpiece. As we see the stoic, rational mask fall to the wayside, the true deranged nature of Norman Bates makes itself known as he lets out one of the most iconic, infamous grins in the history of cinema. The grin itself isn't the main reason to freeze this frame, however, for instead it's the flickering skull imprint that flashes on Norman's face. That skull being that of Norman's long-dead mother, Norma. 4. The Whiteboard, The Cabin in the Woods. After much hype, The Cabin in the Woods ultimately split opinion when it was released in 2011. In the near decade since its release, many have come to appreciate that the Drew Goddard-helmed picture is actually pretty great, but many initially soured on the movie after it was left in limbo for a couple of years. Despite being finished and ready to be released by the start of 2009, the 2-year wait for this picture saw a lot of fans lose interest in this film ahead of its release. One moment of The Cabin in the Woods that grabbed even the biggest of naysayers, however, was when we got to see the whiteboard of ideas that controls all of what is going on within the lab-created experimental horror setting at the crux of the film. Consisting of a laundry list of classic genre tropes and character types, horror hounds were eager to hit pause and fully examine just what famed cliches were present and accounted for. There's werewolves, vampires, aliens, mutants, zombies, clowns, witches, sexy witches, and a ludicrous amount of familiar horror elements to spot for those taking the time to zone in on The Cabin in the Woods' whiteboard. 3. The calls are coming from the house. Black Christmas. Jess, the caller is in the house. The calls are coming from the house. With that, the shocking revelation and that shocking impression at the centre of 1974's Black Christmas is exposed. After so many creepy phone calls and several dead bodies quietly amassed, this beloved picture rocks its audience to the core by revealing that the person who has been causing so much torment throughout Black Christmas is actually somewhere in the sorority house that houses the movie's protagonist. The moment that Olivia Hussey's Jess is informed of this by a panicked Sergeant Nash is horror gold, but it's the immediate aftermath of this blockbuster news that has first-time viewers reaching for the pause button. As Jess stands frozen to the spot, phone still in hand, the camera pans over to the dark, ominous staircase that we now know houses a deranged killer just around the corner. And so, hitting pause here, horror hounds found themselves scouring every inch of the picture in wincing curiosity as to whether the film's killer can be seen. Of course he cannot, and Jess ends up nervously heading up the stairs to find the dead bodies of 2 of her friends. The whole "the calls are coming from the house" angle would go on to become a staple of the horror genre, yet its origin point was here, in Black Christmas. 2. The Shape Unmasked, Halloween. Audiences never got to see the face of the adult Michael Myers. In 2018's Halloween, that all changed. Well, ish. A film that ignores every other Halloween picture bar Carpenter's legendary 1978 offering, David Gordon Green's movie opens up with a documentary film crew who are looking to explore the figure of Michael Myers. And as this crew locates and approaches the detained Michael, franchise fans so nearly got what they'd for so long been intrigued by. While we didn't get to see a front-on, all-out look at the Shape's unmasked visage, we did get the first real look at Michael's face for 40 years. The prospect of the exposed face of Myers was more than enough to get viewers hitting pause in the hope of seeing just what Michael looked like. A sense of privacy and secrecy was still largely there, yet we got enough of a good look to see that Michael's war with Laurie Strode from the 78 film has left his face visibly scarred. In fact, later behind the scenes still showed that Michael had seemingly lost the sight in his eye after Laurie stabbed him in it during that first movie. 1. Angela's frozen face, Sleepaway Camp. It's impossible to talk about moments that made you instantly sit up and take notice, and not talk about Sleepaway Camp. For better or worse. On the surface, this 1983 slasher was every inch as generic and formulaic as its title would suggest. This was at a time when Friday the 13th had become the go-to film to copy, and so a slew of various camp set offerings followed for the horror genre and, for in particular, the slasher subgenre. With an impressive body count amassed by an unknown killer, the big, utterly problematic twist of Sleepaway Camp is that sweet and innocent victim Angela was instead the vicious and demented killer Peter, Angela's believed dead brother. That final act reveal in itself was a shocker, complete with the shot of a naked Angela, but what was truly jarring was how the frame actually looked. As in, Angela actress Felissa Rose, who was only a teenager at the time, had her head superimposed on an adult male body. These days, this would all look seamless thanks to the joys of modern technology. But back in 1983, not so much. That meant that there was an extreme awkwardness in how the crude, frozen, snarling head of Rose and the torso of someone else meshed together. It's made a lot worse by the long shot of this superimposition, which only lasts for a few seconds, being placed between close-ups that were clearly the original actress as she had been throughout the whole film, only confusing viewers about what they'd just seen even more. And that's our list. What horror movie moment made you reach for the remote to press pause? Let us know down in the comments below. I've been Tilly Owen, Tizzle Owen over on social media, and this has been What Culture Horror. Look after yourselves and your loved ones during this festive period. Thanks for watching.